When you got three people on top who own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, 170 million people, you know what? That's oligarchy.
If I were Bernie Sanders at his age, which is somewhere between 70 and 1500, I'd be kicking back, watching ESPN, drinking IPAs, and waiting for my next bowel movement. But that ain't Bernie.
Right now in America, we have over 22 million workers who are making less than $15 an hour, and nearly 40 million people in our country earning less than $17 an hour. Shamefully, the federal minimum wage, despite the efforts of myself and other people here, have not been raised since 2009 and remains an unbelievable $7.25 an hour. Will you work with those of us who want to raise the federal minimum wage to a living wage to take millions of Americans out of poverty?
Senator, I believe that the minimum wage is more of a statewide and regional issue.
So you don't think we should change the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour?
No, sir.
Okay.
All right, that guy he's talking to, that's Trump's Treasury Secretary nominee, Scott Bessent, who is a billionaire, saying that the federal minimum wage should stay at $7.25 an hour, where it's been for the last 16 years.
What the hell did you just say?
Okay, now that's up on a level that beckons incredulity, to say the very least. We're the wealthiest nation in the world, with close to 1,000 billionaires, and we're allowing states to follow the lead of the federal government and essentially keep people poor so U.S.-based corporations can make higher profits and use those profits to bribe representatives to do their dirty work. When Bessent said this,
the minimum wage is more of a statewide and regional issue.
Well, it's the same bullshit the First Lady said about abortion, that the states should handle it, which of course means you can get an abortion in New York or California, but in Texas, if you had a complication, you might just die. So when Bessent, the billionaire, says states like Tennessee or Alabama should decide on raising their own minimum wage, well, you knew right there they don't give a shit. And here's the rub. Raising the minimum wage isn't inflationary, and it helps local economies. In San Francisco, when they raised the minimum wage, Subway sandwiches went from $5 for a foot long to $6. But that also meant that people working at Subways had enough to eat one of the subs they were making.
The federal minimum wage has been $7.25 since 2009. There are 20 states that still have the federal minimum wage at $7.25, and I actually have a map. 19 of these states actually voted for you, sir. Mm-hmm. And you can see it right here. I don't know if you remember this, but during the debate in 2020, I asked you if you would raise the minimum wage. You said you would consider it. And so my question for you is, now that you are going back to the White House, for these 19 states that voted for you, are you going to raise the federal minimum wage?
It's a very low number. I will agree. It's a very low number. Let me give you the downside, though. Yeah. In California, they raised it up to a very high number. And your restaurants are going out of business all over the place. The population is shrinking.
Stop right there. Restaurants in San Francisco are doing the same business that restaurants in the rest of the state are seeing. The minimum wage increase can be offset by a slight rise in prices, but that's not San Francisco's biggest problem. California has 45 million people. The only thing shrinking here is Trump.
And he referred to my hands. If they're small, something else must be small. I guarantee you there's no problem.
It's had a very negative impact. But there is a level at which you can do it, absolutely. Yeah.
What is that level? Do you
I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I can say this. You have a lot of businesses that are open and thriving because of the lower minimum wage. If you raise it too much, and you understand this, if California went crazy, they went crazy. And people, the restaurants are closing all over. Many more people are hurt.
So I hear you saying, similarly to what you said in 2020, will you consider? Is this something you're going to look at?
I want to speak to the governors. And the other thing that's very complicated about minimum wages is places are so different. Mississippi and Alabama and great places are very different than New York or California. I mean, in terms of the cost of living and other things. So it would be nice to have just a minimum wage for the whole country, but it wouldn't work because you have places where it's very inexpensive to live, where a minimum wage, which is $8 or $9, might have very little effect.
Yeah, he's right. Those red states are poor, with large corporations making billions by paying people obscenely low wages and daring them to quit. Right now, 22 million people make less than $15 an hour. And where do the vast majority live? Red America.
I love the poorly educated.
Now, you and I both know Trump won't raise a minimum wage. His Treasury Secretary just said so. And dropping taxes on Social Security and overtime like he promised? Come on. You knew he was lying, right? Trump's set to drop corporate taxes and increase the deficit for Americans, which of course will again lead to inflation, recessions, and fewer jobs for poor Americans. Listen to this math. If you live in Birmingham, Alabama, where the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, that's $15,000 a year. A 3-bedroom apartment in Alabama averages $1,000 a month. That leaves you with $3,000 for the rest of the year to pay for food, clothes, gas, utilities, and college. Forget about it.
Who's forcing you to be gay?
Joe Biden and his crew.
Joe Biden's forcing you to be gay?
No, not forcing me. Make sure you get that right. I ain't gay and ain't got nothing to do with it.
You think that guy went to college?
You okay?
Again, we are a rich country, but 50% of our wealth is in the hands of the top 1%. That is an obscenity, but understandable. Corporations use their money to protect their money, from lawyers to grifters in the White House. In 2023, 80 million workers aged 16 and older were paid at hourly rates, representing 55% of all the wage and salary workers. Among those paid by the hour, 80,000 workers earned exactly the prevailing federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. About 789,000 workers had wages below the federal minimum.
Now that's f***ed up.
And now, under the leadership of President Musk and the First Lady, foreign workers will soon enter our job market, working for less and taking American jobs from American workers. And those people voted for him.
This is an American sweatshop. They flourished in the early 1900s when people were desperate for work. And since there were no regulations on what they had to pay, they paid workers next to nothing. So the U.S. adopted something that had already worked in other countries, a minimum wage. This is a chart of the minimum wage in the United States over the past 60 years. You can see how it's gone up and up and up from $1 an hour in 1960 to $7.25 today. Go America, right? But this chart is actually pretty misleading. If you take the same line but adjust it for inflation, you'll see the problem. Every time the minimum wage has been raised, inflation has dragged it right back down. Really, America's minimum wage hasn't gone up. It's essentially stayed the same since the 80s. What you're seeing here, this constant up and down, this is weird. It's not how the rest of the world does it, and it leads to a bunch of problems for American workers and businesses.
Bernie Sanders is a pit bull and as transparent as any politician in my lifetime, in a good way.
Shamefully, the federal minimum wage, despite the efforts of myself and other people here, have not been raised since 2009 and remains an unbelievable $7.25 an hour.
But if it's Bernie Sanders versus corporate America, Musk, Bezos, and Trump, Bernie can't win. And while the rest of America cowers, afraid to complain because they'll lose their jobs, Bernie rails on. And like most things in life, you really won't appreciate his voice until it's gone. He stands up for people who made this country, blue or red, against the creeping oligarchy and men who get richer every day.
We don't talk about this enough.
In 2009, the last time the minimum wage was raised, people were struggling through the subprime crisis and the subsequent recession, created by those billionaires that caused millions of Americans to lose their home and businesses. Again, in the last 16 years, the billionaires made billions more while Americans struggled with rent and food. Look, $7.25 isn't enough to even buy a sandwich anymore. So that leaves but one option for the millions trying to feed their families. It's time to eat the rich.
Goddamn right.
They're eating the dogs.
You're an idiot!
And this guy's personal life is a total disaster.
I may find some parts of the story to be offensive.
I think he's crazy.
I'm Chip Franklin.